Supreme Magus, Chapter 52 Unexpected Answers. After the battle concluded, everyone dropped down on the ground, finally able to relax. Despite the victory, there was no place for joy or celebration. The Tron Woods would bear a scar that could take months, if not years, to heal. The three kings were already discussing how to rearrange the borders of their areas of influence to prevent future food shortage to affect them too harshly. Lid instead was still pondering on the young bear's memories, comparing their lives. It was only because he had been reborn in a good family that he had not ended up obsessing with power, being able to afford taking care of his body. In its place, with the fierce competition of the wilderness, he may have been tempted of doing the same. All his life up to that point had been all a huge risk-reward assessment too. Lid had simply been luckier. It was the second time in a single day that his victory had been hollow. He started to feel depressed, making the adrenaline rush dissolve much faster. Soon, exhaustion would have taken its toll. He needed some real sleep. Before going home, though, there were still some things he had to do. First, he gave the sheep a whole boar to eat. Then Lid proceeded to heal its atrophied leg. He couldn't do it before, because the fatigue from the recovering from such a wound, coupled with its already debilitated state from the prolonged battle, would have made the sheep faint. Being a healer was almost a second nature to Lid at that point. He also wanted that whatever happened next in the woods, they would face it on their own. Lid had already enough on his plate. All he wanted was to sleep and eat for a week straight. Second, he finally could express not to one but to three powerful magical beasts his doubts about Tier 4 magic with a practical example. With the energy he had left, Lid executed with true magic a scaled-down version of Tier 4 Lightning God's Finger spell, waving together fire and air magic to conjure a small sphere of plasma. The real deal would be bigger, hence doing more damage but also requiring much more energy. Because of its nature, plasma was highly volatile and would disperse at the smallest mistake. It could indeed generate temperature in the orders of thousands degrees, even striking with surgical precision. But it was incredibly slow to move, and Lid couldn't find a single practical use to justify spending so much mana in just one spell. Both the Rai and the Sheaf were natural air magic masters, so they could immediately understand the nature of the spell and its underlying effects. "That's just useless," Reaper blurted. "It's the prettiest wave of mana I have ever seen," Protector laughed. "With much less energy and effort, you could wipe away an entire acre of woods. I think the problem is not you, but the spell itself. According to what you told me in the past, humans deem each other so stupid and untrustworthy that they divided magic into steps, or tiers, as you call them. In my opinion, either the human that invented that did have more free time than brains, or the spell is incomplete on purpose." "Are humans really so idiotic to teach their cubs how to kill a prey, but not where the best parts are?" The sheaf was flabbergasted at the idea. "Another dead end," Lid sighed, his depression getting worse. The Rai was his last hope to make head or tails of the magical conundrum. "I'm sorry, Scourge," the Rai said, "but us magical beasts have a much more practical view about magic. Most of your human issues are either senseless or idiotic to me. Another problem is that we are incapable of controlling the whole world's energy. Only King Level Beast can manipulate two elements, while the most complex spells you showed me sometimes use three or more. I would love to help you further, but between my duties and this tragedy, I need to focus on avoiding the impending famine. Sorry. The Rye and the Chief left him, starting to discuss how to make the whole forest, especially the zone most damaged by the wither, survive the coming winter. Lead could feel his headache getting worse by the second. So after bidding them goodbye, he started to move as fast as he could towards home. So much for a second and third opinion. If the Rye is right, then we have no chance. No academy means no tier 5 spell, which in turn implies that we will be stuck with tier 3 as our main source of inspiration. Not to mention that I really do not envy all those students that waste the whole year of their life practicing incomplete spells. Actually, I have been pondering about what Nana told us. And I think there is another possibility. Maybe tier 4 and fire are so rare to come around because they are strictly related to a mage specialization, Solus suggested. What if the lightning god's finger isn't an offensive spell, but rather an energy source for constructs? Or maybe it's the only way to carve magic runes in the hardest material used for weapons or armors. We know nothing about forge mastering, potion brewing, or anything related to indirect magic. You are probably right, and that adds insult to our injury. Seems we are destined to live 4 very uninteresting years. As soon as he came home, Lit refused to move a finger, going to bed right after dinner, hoping that the next day would bring him good news. Yet months passed, his birthday was getting closer, and so was the deadline for applying to any academy. Meanwhile, Count Lark hadn't been sitting on his hands. He had used every single opportunity, every pretext, no matter how flimsy, to seek audience with the king, and when that failed, he worked his way down the court's hierarchy. He had pestered everyone so much that many would hide at his presence or pretend to not even notice him, to not give any opportunity to persist in his fool's errand. But the Count was a stubborn man. He knew rules and regulations inside out, and by using real problems related to Lustria County as a cover, there was only so much they could do to avoid him without setting a dangerous precedent. He was able to endure hours-long waits like they were nothing, and then still had the energy to plead for his case until his hosts were so exhausted that to get rid of him they had to at least promise to consider his claims. When Headmistress Linnea talked about wanting to send a political messenger, this wasn't the result she was hoping for. Soon her name would get associated with ingenious curses and swearing, and so her bloodline until the 7th generation. Count Lark soon became a hot topic, receiving the same degree of attention as an impending flood or plague would get. One way or another, he achieved part of his objective, making the whole court discuss the possible implication that Headmistress Linnea's new rule could cause in the future. Was it really worth to bar the road to a promising magician because of how or where Did he or she learn spells? Why punish the victim of a crime just because she had asked to uphold the law? Should a headmistress of such an important institution be allowed to change the rules of admission on a whim without any form of control? An important discussion like that needed time, but most importantly, peace and quiet. So the court unanimously resolved to grant Marchioness de Star, the true ruler of Lustria Country, extraordinary powers to face Count Lark as she thought best. In other words, she was left with the short end of the stick. Now, Count Lark would relentlessly pester her, while everyone else would live happily ever after. Marchioness de Star already had her fair share of trouble. Tranquil Lark was just the icing on the cake. She pondered more than once to use her newfound authority to behead him. But her good sense and all her personal advisers stopped her. Lark was one of her best retainers. He was sincere, didn't scheme on taxes, never had sordid affairs that she was forced to cover up. Not to mention that under his guiding hand, Lustria County had been flourishing for over 20 years. Without that, the Marchioness and her mother before her had ever to move a finger. It was a well-oiled machine, and honest to boot. Replacing him would cause her much trouble than executing him would prevent. Having her back against the wall, she decided that honesty was the best policy. Lark was a loving father after all. Maybe he would understand her position and leave her alone if he knew the truth. After granting him 37 audiences in less than 3 months, she explained to Count Lark her family's plight. As you know, the higher you get, the more trouble you incur into. A few weeks ago, my family experienced an attempted murder. Thanks to the safety measure we had surrounded ourselves with, it failed. But it didn't pass without consequences. One of the assailants managed to reach my daughter. Her magical protections took the brunt of the hit, reducing a dead blow to slightly more than a pinprick. All is well that ends well, the Count commented. The Marchioness had to stop herself from slapping him to death, rubbing her forehead instead, trying to calm down. I wish, because of that pinprick, my daughter has been cursed. Cursed? Count Lark monocle jumped out of his orbit from the surprise. Usually he would scoff at such preposterous concept. In all his years of exploring magic curiosity from all over the world, he had encountered curses only in the bedtime stories he read for his children. But the Marchioness' glare induced him to put his monocle back in place and let her continue. Yes, cursed. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it firsthand. When the healer tried to help her, preventing a scar, instead of disappearing, the wound became bigger. I tried everything, calling renowned masters, potionists, healers, medicine women, shamans. Nothing worked. Now, the only thing that keeps my eye ever bleeding daughter alive is the constant consumption of potions and the help of my personal magician Ains. As you know, he is considered a genius, maybe the best ever graduated from the Black Griffin Academy. To make things worse, when the assailants understood they had no chance of escaping, they chose to blow themselves up, destroying all the evidence. There was no one to interrogate, nothing left to examine to understand what they had done. This is fantastic, the Count thought. This is terrible, the Count actually said, keeping his best grieving face.